Okay, the Battles of the War of 1812. This is our second edition. And I thought today, before we get into the couple of battles we're going to take a look at today, I want to talk about why it is that the Americans declared war on Canada. We think of the American army as being, absolutely unbeatable. We see it around the world, right? They declared war on Canada, or on Britain at least, marched their soldiers up to the border, and yet the British, who in both cases were highly outnumbered at the first two battles, actually won the battles, right down to the point of taking Detroit. Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first and most important reason was that the American armed forces were basically gutted. They were taken apart just after the Revolutionary War to save money. Okay, the President of the United States at the time, right after the Revolutionary War ended, looked at the amount of money they were spending on their armed forces and decided it was far too much for a country its size to be able to afford. After all, they didn't have an empire like Britain did. The other reasons were the fact that the British North Americans, were defending their own home. And when you're defending your own home, you defend it with a lot more passion than you would if you were attacking somebody else's. And the last one was the actual American soldiers. Because there had been so much dismantling of American forces, James Madison, the president, counted on a lot of militias to do some of the attacking of British North American holdings in this continent. The problem was that most of the militias refused to go past their own borders. When you're brought together with a militia, you're just an average guy, right? You're just someone who lives on the block or works in town, and you join a bunch of people who would be there to protect that area if it's ever attacked. But a lot of militias said that that's what their job was, defensive, not to go attack another country. Add to that the fact that the American economy was hurting because of all the blockades that the British had put into place, and the fact that there were even states who didn't want to get involved in the war in the first time. It made it very, very difficult for them to put together a fighting force that could win a battle. And that continued through the first battles of 1812. So I want to take a look at Queenston Heights and the death of Brock, and that happened on October 13th, 1812. You see, throughout September of that year, the Americans were putting together a really large army on the Niagara frontier for an invasion of Niagara. They were actually going to leave Buffalo, go up towards where the bridges are now that can take you from Canada into the United States, especially in Buffalo, at places like Lewiston and down towards Niagara. And the plan was they wanted to sort of start a bridgehead. They wanted to get across the border and then form a place where they could sort of work out of and start taking over the rest of Upper Canada. And they also wanted to cut off the British supply lines to the area around Detroit. So on October 13th, 1812, the invasion was launched on the village of Queenston. Now, a large part of that army were militiamen from New York and Pennsylvania, and they refused to cross into Canada for the reasons I said before. British Commander Major General Sir Isaac Brock got his forces all together. He had British regulars, he had militiamen from the Niagara and Toronto areas, and he had 100 allies from Native Canadian tribes. And he marched to Queenston just so he could oppose the American invasion. Now, very early in the Battle of Queenston Heights, Brock was killed. But eventually, the British won the whole battle. And it was a tremendously important battle because what happened was a final charge on the heights took place. The British all got together and started running up towards the heights, 12 hours after the first American assault. And even though the Americans had a much superior army, they had many, many more men than the Canadians did, the Canadians and the British won the battle, and in fact, they took nearly 1,000 soldiers hostage. And even though Brock, who was known as the hero of Upper Canada, was killed, the battle did a great deal to bolster the morale of Upper Canadians. It also showed that the British, many of whom were recent immigrants from the United States, they were United Empire Loyalists, would fight tenaciously, would fight tremendously to defend their adopted country, even against their former countrymen and their neighbors. It was an important battle because it really put into a framework exactly where the Canadian identity was beginning to form. Okay, next time we're going to look at Prescott and the capture of Ogdensburg, and now we're turning towards 1813.